Tonight, raging wildfires around LA send a surprising shockwave through the community.
So I said, I'm just going to jump in the pool. I can barely swim, but I'm just that's our only way out.
As tens of thousands are forced to evacuate, a look at the effort to contain the flames. Plus, President Jimmy Carter honored at the nation's capital ahead of his official state funeral. And
as promised, we're starting today with border security.
A newly passed House border bill heads for Senate approval. The details of the Laken Riley Act. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Raging wildfires scorching Southern California. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Thousands evacuated and entire neighborhoods gone in an instant. A massive fire that began in Los Angeles' Pacific Palisades region has multiplied and is now 3 separate infernos spreading across the area.
More than 10,000 acres have been burned, while the fires have destroyed or threatened thousands of homes and property. Hurricane-strength winds are fueling the flames, burning the equivalent of, get this, 5 football fields every minute. More than 70,000 people are under evacuation orders, stranding drivers in jam-packed streets for hours. 2 people are already confirmed dead, along with numerous reported injuries. The raging wildfires, 0% contained as of now and growing.
Now, together, these fires are stretching the capacity of emergency services to their maximum limits.
About 1,400 firefighters have been deployed. The high winds are expected to ease off later today, but windy conditions are forecast to stick around in the coming days as the fires continue to burn out of control.
Here with us now is Pastor Greg Laurie of Harvest Christian Fellowship in Riverside, California. Pastor Laurie, welcome. So thankfully, we know the fire's not reached your community, but what are you hearing and seeing on the ground from people affected?
Well, these fires are really strong and spreading quickly, as we've already heard in your report. And we have people that we know from our own congregation that have been displaced from their homes. In fact, so many people have been evacuated, thousands and thousands of people with very little warning, like get out of your house now. And so this is, we're just praying, Lord, you think of that time where Jesus looked at the storm on the Sea of Galilee and said, peace be still. We need the winds to stop. It would even be a little better if the rain came too. And these courageous firefighters, 14,000 of them as mentioned, are out there risking life and limb to defend property. Though every loss of life is tragic, 2 people have died. It could be much worse, actually. So I think a lot of people have been evacuated in a timely manner. But just pray and pray for these firefighters. Pray that these fires are contained, because at this point there's 0 containment. So we need some divine intervention here, and I think we can do what we all do best as Christians and pray for God's intervention.
And as you said, you know, Jesus' words, we can pray that he can say it again, peace be still. You had just mentioned how the fires are affecting members of your church, and I know that your church is no stranger to responding to fire. So how is your church and other ministries stepping up to meet the needs? Yeah, well, you know, we're pulling things together quickly because here, these things, it's escalated so quickly. But we put together a fund that you can reach at harvest.org/relief. And there we're going to designate funds to bring help and hope to people in the name of Jesus Christ. So we'll be there for practical things, water, food, whatever a person has an immediate need. And then we'll be there also with spiritual help because, you know, it's so devastating. I know houses can be rebuilt, but when you've built your own home or you've lived there for years or maybe generations, and to lose your home and your possessions, this is really traumatizing for people. Yeah. So it's an opportunity for us to step into a place of pain and suffering and difficulty and minister. We had a very similar situation over in the island of Maui, where we also have a church. And thankfully, CBN was a great help to us in our relief efforts there. But so many people lost their homes there and businesses were lost. So what we did was we were there helping people in practical ways and we were helping people in spiritual ways. And that's just pretty much what we're here to do right here in our own backyard in Southern California.
Yeah, Pastor Lori, what message do you want to send to people affected by the fires who may be feeling just devastated right now, overwhelmed? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say this is a time where we look to the Lord. To lose one's home is a horrible thing, but it's not the worst thing that can happen, but it's a very bad thing. Be thankful you're alive. If you have your family and your life, that's a lot right there. And it's a reminder that, you know, our ultimate home, yes, is in heaven. Jesus has gone to prepare a place for us, but it's a time to look to the Lord and let him comfort you and encourage you through this time of loss, and know that, well, the Bible says God can bring beauty out of ashes. You know, we think of the story of Nehemiah. Right. The walls were lying in ruin and rubble, and they went back and they rebuilt again.
That is right.
And that's what will happen.
Pastor Greg Laurie with Harvest Church, thank you so much for coming on. Great perspective and great reminder. Stay safe.
Here in Washington, streams of mourners are paying their respects to Jimmy Carter, the former president, lying in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda ahead of tomorrow's state funeral. Politicians on both sides of the aisle honored Carter in a ceremony.
May his life be a lesson for the ages and a beacon for the future.
Carter's state funeral is tomorrow at the National Cathedral. He will be buried beside his beloved wife, Rosalind, outside their home in Plains, Georgia, where he was born and died.
Well, President Carter is being remembered for his public and humanitarian service, his humble beginnings, and Christian faith.
That's right. CBN's Kelly Wright sat down with Carter's personal pastor, Tony Loudon, to learn more about the faith that shaped him. Kelly, what struck you about the interview?
Jenna, Pastor Tony Loudon has been serving as President Carter's pastor for 10 years now. So what struck me about my interview with him was how the two men actually developed a deep trust and enduring bond of friendship that to this day is a great source of inspiration to Pastor Loudon during his time of mourning.
He asked me to be Miss Rosalind and his pastor, where 9 times out of 10, they were always ministering to me in their latter days, giving me a rites of passage into manhood, teaching me about what service is all about. Every time I walk in the room, asking me the 4 questions: where have you been? What have you done? Who have you helped? And how can I help you help them? You know, and then taking it to the point where pushed me to serve even more. Not just the church, not just to them, but taking what I believe, faith and hope, and taking it outside into areas where there's darkness, where there's no hope, there's no guardrails. You know, how do we look at ways of getting faith and hope and allow that to be our guardrails in our democracy, in our communities, in our homes, in our schools, looking at ways of being able to give those who are living in darkness hope that they can make it.
An important message and a great personal reflection between a pastor and a former president. Kelly, what else does Pastor Loudon recall about President Jimmy Carter's life of service and his impact on America?
Well, John, first of all, these two men were, like the Bible says, iron sharpening iron. And there is a direct connection between President Carter, Pastor Loudon, and even President Trump. Loudon recalls when President Trump appointed him to serve as his reentry czar to coordinate prison reform for the previous Trump administration, it was President Carter who actually encouraged him to take on that job and still serve as his pastor. Loudon says it reminds us all that it's a reflection on how President Carter believed in service to God and country.
He didn't hold grudges against people. You know, he was too conservative for the Democrats and too liberal for the Republicans. But yet, when we look at his celebration coming from Plains, Georgia, driving through red counties, where you know they are Republican counties, Republicans out holding flags and saluting the hearse as he drive by. Standing on the overpass of the highways, celebrating his life. Their Georgia son who's made a difference around the world. See, I think we have to get to the point where we get back to using faith and hope as our guardrails in our nation. And I think that's the message that he was teaching us. If you look at his timing, when God called the Sunday school teacher home, right before we're making the transition of our leadership, right before the swearing in of Congress, right before picking the Speaker of the House, and in between the inauguration, God and the Sunday school teacher giving us a lesson, giving our nation a lesson on faith and hope and what servant leadership looked like all over again.
And John and Jenna, what the pastor points out is that Jimmy Carter was a man who lived, according to Galatians, a life according to the Spirit.
A beautiful life lived indeed. Kelly, great report. Thank you so much for the interview between you and Pastor Loudon.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, a new border security bill heads to the Senate. What it means for immigration policy when Faith Nation returns.
Welcome back. In other news tonight, President-elect Trump is asking the Supreme Court to step in on his behalf.
He wants the justices to block the sentencing in his New York criminal hush money case, slated to take place this Friday, after an appeals court judge refused yesterday to stop it. In their petition, Trump's attorneys write a stay is necessary to, quote, prevent grave injustice and harm to the institution of the presidency and the operations of the federal government, end quote. If the Supreme Court doesn't intervene, Trump will likely just get a slap on the wrist. The judge in the case has already ruled out jail time, probation, or fines.
And here with us now is Brad Jacob, Associate Dean and Professor at Regent University School of Law. And here with us now is Brad Jacob, Associate Dean and Professor at Regent University School of Law. Brad, welcome. So how much merit do you think the court will give Trump's argument, given that his sentencing is scheduled just 10 days before he officially becomes the 47th president?
I don't think the Supreme Court is going to do anything with this. President Trump's argument is referencing back to his Supreme Court decision, Trump versus United States, which said that some official actions of a president are exempt from criminal punishment because they're his official duties. This New York case doesn't have anything to do with his official duties as president. It was conduct that happened while he was running for president in 2016, the hush money payments to the porn star, all of that, and then financial manipulations. And he's been convicted in a New York state court. There's no immunity issue to raise at this point. Now, there's going to be limits on what sort of sentence or what sort of punishment can be applied to Mr. Trump. And I think if this New York court attempts to put him in prison 10 days before he takes office as president, the Supreme Court would jump in an instant and say, you can't do that to the president of the United States. But in all likelihood, this is going to be a fine. The court is going to ask a very rich man to pay some money because of this criminal conviction, and that doesn't interfere with his presidential duties. And I see absolutely no reason why the Supreme Court would jump into that.
So would the case be over at that point?
I think it would. The case would be over, and he would have to pay whatever fine there is, satisfy whatever the judgment is. But he has already been convicted. So unless the sentence is one that would interfere with his presidential duties, I don't think the Supreme Court has anything to say at this point. They can't overrule. The United States Supreme Court cannot overrule a decision of the New York courts on issues of New York law.
You know, Judge,
and that's all that's here.
Judge Merchan cited Chief Justice John Roberts in his opinion, sharply rebuking public officials for intimidating judges and defying court rulings. Your thoughts about those statements and those arguments and how that might factor into the decision making? And a second part B of the question, if I can, how soon might we see that ruling?
A ruling on Mr. Trump's request to stop the sentencing?
Correct.
Well, before Friday, which is when the sentencing is. So they're going to have to if they're going to act, they would have to act before then. But I don't think they're going to. You know, clearly we're in a culture right now where so many people on the political left and the political right only care about their outcomes.
Right.
They only care about my side winning. And so when a case comes down the way they don't like, they get very angry and say the courts are illegitimate. And then you've got, somebody trying to assassinate a Supreme Court justice, somebody who's outside Justice Kavanaugh's house. You've got other federal judges getting threats and intimidation. We've got a huge cultural problem that people don't understand that the courts are to apply the law neutrally and fairly as best they can. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter whether it's your party or the other party, it's the same law applied to everyone. So the Chief Justice is right. We've got a really problematic culture these days in how people think about courts.
Brad, we are unfortunately out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Brad Jacob with Regent University, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, at the U.S. Capitol, Senate Democrats say they will vote to begin debating a new border security bill that passed in the U.S. House. It's called the Laken Riley Act, named for the Georgia nursing student who was killed last year by an undocumented migrant on the University of Georgia's campus. The bill calls for the detention of illegal migrants arrested for theft. It also allows state attorneys general to sue and enforce the law. The act received bipartisan support in the House, with 48 Democrats joining Republicans 264 to 159. The Senate plans to take up the measure on Friday, where it's expected to pass.
Up next, fighting ramps up between Israel and Hamas. The latest on efforts to free hostages.
Welcome back. A painful homecoming tonight in Israel.
Israeli troops recovered the body of at least one hostage from Gaza. The IDF says it found the remains of Yosef Al-Zayadnya in a Rafah tunnel. At the time of this broadcast, authorities were also examining whether another body recovered today was an additional hostage. The military is concerned about the fate of Al-Zayadnya's son, Hamza, also abducted by Hamas on October 7th. This comes as the U.S. says it is very close to a hostage ceasefire deal, but admits it may not happen before Trump re-enters the White House.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
Meanwhile, Israel is continuing airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Palestinian medics said at least 5 people were killed in Wednesday's strikes, including 2 infants. Hamas has continued to launch rockets at Israel on a near daily basis.
Well, when Israeli soldiers die in battle, it is understandably incredibly hard for their parents and families, often left feeling as though they're forgotten long after the funeral ends.
CBN Israel is working with an organization to help support those grieving relatives in the moment and help meet their longer-term needs. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us that story.
Light to the Families Foundation, or La Mishpacha, has one message: choose life.
We do everything, and I mean everything, to help parents who sent their children to serve in the army, to contribute to a strong and proud state of Israel, educated their children to give, to be leaders, and the children went out to serve and didn't come home.
The focus when soldiers die tends to be helping their surviving spouse and children. Light to the Families knows parents and siblings need support as well. Director Irit Oren-Gondras says their work extends beyond the funeral and cemetery as they focus on families returning home and beyond, like giving them this outdoor concert in Jerusalem.
And to give them hope, to build them towers of hope. As long as they remember the child lives. The soldiers are the symbol of the world. They are the biggest, most wonderful crown on which the state of Israel was built.
Chantal and Nikki Young immigrated to Israel when the war began. Their son, Natanel, serving in the IDF, became one of the first October 7th casualties as terrorists invaded his base.
My pen will always be great. My heart is broken, and that's never going to heal. But what do help is to see that the people care.
Chantal says Light to the Families plays an important role by providing activities to cheer them up and give them strength.
It's not about free concerts, and it's not about that. It's about they are caring, and it's really important. And I want to thank them.
Gondras met Nati Perry when he served as an officer in 2006. She saw how he cared for the family of one of his fallen soldiers. In December 2023, Perry's own son, Itai, a 36-year-old father of 3, died in battle.
Irit said that she wants to bring us light, to bring us happiness. I can't say that it is happiness. We suffer every day. We think about our sons every day, of course. But this organization brings us something that we couldn't imagine that it will happen. We couldn't imagine. I didn't believe that I will be a part of it. But we take part of it and we like it.
Sensait Raviv lost her youngest son, Lior, in battle in Gaza.
Irit is the chairman of this Orla Mishpachot, and she really wants that everybody continues living. Everybody continues living. She doesn't want that we will only stay at home inside the house and crying all the time, because life continues anyway.
Gondras says the partnering with CBN Israel helps her support the bereaved families.
We are closing the curtain on the pain and opening a gate to hope. This is the gate of hope, and you are helping me open the gates of hope to the people and the parents that we owe so much to every day, every hour. You've opened a gate.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Finally tonight, a unique way to enjoy a snow day.
You can say that again. After heavy snowfall blanketed the East Coast, some people decided to make the most of it. Right here in Washington, D.C., two-time Olympian Claire Egan strapped on her skis and took a spin around the National Mall.
I just moved to Washington, D.C. in the fall, so I thought my skiing days were maybe behind me, but this is awesome. Best snow day ever.
A nice way to get a workout. In Ohio, where some parts of the state received as much as 8 inches of snow, and a man had the same idea. Most likely getting around town better than most cars, I'd say. Pretty free skating there.
You were saying that D.C. was a ghost town on Monday.
That's right.
Yeah, it's slowly picked up a little bit every day.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, have a great night.